Thank you so much. It's a real privilege to be with you today. We are going to be talking about igniting people, igniting growth with courageous conversations. It is the first time we're going to be talking about this. And as such, we're hoping to share something new and to stimulate some new ideas and challenge you in some different ways. In doing so, we're going to share a couple of case studies, tell a couple of stories. One of the stories is going to be about the All Blacks while I wait for the tech. And let's see if we can get it going. So to introduce JLO, we've been around 22 years. I started the company 22 years ago. JLO, Joyce, heads up one of our 15 businesses. She's one of 35 boomerangs. We call people who come back to our business boomerangs. So Joyce, thanks for being foolish enough to be one of the 35 and join me today here. Courageous Conversations is not a new idea. So Alan Clark, CEO of SA Breweries, was talking about it. The Harvard Business Review's been talking about it for years. And Alan Weber, founder of Fast Company, was talking about it. In the knowledge economy, conversations are the most important work. To a definition, the business poet David White, it's an interesting definition, but it's a definition that probably won't surprise. It's the conversation you're not having right now. It's the one you don't want to have, and the one that you hope is not true. And here's my first surprise for you. So to say red flag, if you're going to leave here, or if there's a particular training course, or if you don't have the muscle, or if your colleagues don't have the muscle, or if your organization doesn't have the muscle for courageous conversations, red flag. On the left over there, the amygdala kicking in, the limbic brain system, you will have fight, flight, and fright. In the middle, the metaphor is we got to work with 100 cups of energy, and if we don't have the muscle for a courageous conversation, if our colleagues, if our organization isn't ready and the environment is not enabling, the research says that we will use 80 cups of that energy in self-protection in a day and self-defense. Would you believe? And thirdly, slightly more soulfully perhaps, are you aware that if you don't have the muscle, and if you are a 10-year-old who was bullied or had an unpleasant piece of feedback or had a teacher, colleague, brother, sister treat you in a way that you're still not comfortable with feedback, you will go to your 10-year-old. And going to my 10-year-old, I can promise you it's not a pretty thing. We have to build muscle. And so I want to part in this conversation with you around the idea of building muscle and share with you some ideas. I'm hoping some new ideas about how you and your organization can build some muscle. So it's not easy. It has components of leadership and culture and skill and the practice of that skill with what we call deliberate practice. The environment needs to be enabling, and there needs to be a process. However, the two case studies I've chosen will suggest to you that there's massive upside. Just adopting the idea of courageous conversations can fundamentally transform your organization and your organization's performance. Okay, are you with me? Can I share my two case studies? The first one might surprise you. It's a story of the All Blacks. It tells how, over a period of 15 years, they decided, at a departure point in 2004, to become the greatest side ever, measured by winning World Cups, which they'd never done before, and taking a winning ratio from what was then best in the world at 70% to over 90%. And at the core of that decision was this idea of courageous conversations, which I'd like to share with you very briefly as an overview. It did indeed have communication. This guy was appointed coach in 2004 when it started, and he says there was a lot of communication. So as part of the thing, this idea of communication, but it was a lot more than that. And so we're going to watch the captain now talking about what leadership meant to him, how he embraced this idea of feedback, how he changed as a leader, changed as a player, and grew as a human being.
The first thing is you've got to be the best player you can be, or you've got to earn your spot, or you've got to be an automatic selection. And so that's the first job you get right. If you get that right every week, well, that's probably 80% of your job as a captain, and then the 20% is being able to help others and ensure the team's going well. And I think when I first started, I was more worried about being captain than I was about being a player. And it took me a while to get the balance right, and that's my big job. I write down every week is get my job right. I get that right, then that's going to take care of a lot of job you got to do as captain. There's guys in the team that've been around longer than I had, who've been captain themselves. I always wondered how they saw it. Like, they always backed you, I suppose, but you never. I guess it was my own insecurities, as you're never quite sure. I think as time's gone on, I've become a lot more comfortable, and then because of that, now I rely on a bunch of guys around you, senior boys who, to be honest, have all been great, and I'm quite prepared to say, hey, look, what do you reckon? And they've got the answer, so you go with it, and not feel pressures about not knowing it yourself. At the end of the day, I've got guys that have played as long as I have, captained other teams, so they've got just as much knowledge as I have, and I guess I see my role as making sure that as a group we get the right answer. And it doesn't need to be mine. I think that's the thing that changes. It doesn't have to be me getting it, as long as we get the right answer. And you earn it together. So out in the field when the heat's on, you can look at your mate and you have that sort of, without saying anything, that look of you've got each other's back. That's pretty powerful, and that makes it a whole lot easier to do what you do, I think.
So we get a sense that this idea of courageous conversation starts with me. So the story briefly is in 2004. In 2003, have we still got sound? So in 2003, they'd been the best rugby side in the world again. They'd lost the World Cup. The coaches had been fired, as is tradition. New coaches had come in. They'd come to South Africa. They'd come last. Can you believe it? We actually won that particular competition. And the coaches had discovered this culture of binge drinking and behavior that they really didn't like. And so they embraced this idea of change. They set a new vision, important to a courageous conversation. We want to be the best rugby side that's ever been. We want to set a record that's never been set and maybe won't ever be set again. A mission, how's this for a mission? We want to unite New Zealand. And then they went away on a 3-day strategy session when they came back from South Africa, from that disaster, from that binge drinking, from various All Blacks being picked up in their hotel foyers, blind drunk. And they came back from that 3-day strategy session with a punchline, with a how-to. That was that one, would you believe, a rugby side, that one up there, which said everything about what they wanted to do in terms of the change. Better people make better All Blacks. And into that came this idea of we want to improve as human beings. And into that comes this idea of the change and the courageous conversation. So I want to rewind a little bit. Richie McCaw is the captain. We're going back to him as an 18-year-old and a courageous conversation he has with his uncle in a McDonald's store. And his uncle says to him, so Richie, you want to be an All Black? And he says, yes, I do. And his uncle asks him an interesting question.
I had this training guy for a trial. I was talking to my uncle about it, showing him, you want to be an All Black? Not thinking it was anything more a bit of a dream. Well, right down how you would get there. So I started putting down, I made New Zealand under 19s in 99. The New Zealand Colts, and then you went into the Canterbury A team in 2002. And then after 2003 World Cup, there's some guys moving on from the All Blacks. He goes, well, if you're going to have this line after the All Black, you don't just want to be an All Black, you want to be a great All Black. I thought, what? I was a bit embarrassed about even writing that. I just wrote GAB at the bottom.
It was a courageous question, wasn't it? And it was a courageous opportunity for McCall to embrace that question, and it changed his life. So I don't just want to be an employee of the organization to which you all belong. I want to be a great employee. I don't just want a good organization, I want a great organization. And out of that courageous conversation, his life changed. He took that napkin back, he put it in the back of his cupboard, but he always remembered, before every single one of his 148 games, which was a record, that it's not just about wearing the jersey, it's not just about being an All Black, it's about being a great All Black and what that represented. Going back to that initial courageous conversation. So part of the journey here and the opportunity here, and one of the points I'm trying to make is the courageous conversation starts with me. And that's what the coaches and the captain fundamentally realized. This guy was an autocratic headmaster. And as he says here, he says, if I'd behaved that way, they wouldn't have bought into me. I needed to change as a human being. I needed to change from authoritarian to someone who is embracing of conversation, someone who is going to empower a side to make decisions that I wasn't in a position to make. This fellow was the assistant coach at the time. He's the lead coach today. He also had to embrace this idea of it starts with me. He's a police constable. He had no communication skills whatsoever. And so he had to embrace this idea in order to be world class, in order to be a great All Black coach. I need to become a great communicator, and in that environment, I need to learn the skills. I need to develop the muscle to have courageous conversations. And 10 years later, this is what McCall said of this fellow who could not communicate, couldn't ask questions, couldn't listen, couldn't give feedback. He said this: he became the most skilled person I ever met at giving feedback for improvement, while still leaving you know that he believed in you. Nothing went unsaid in that All Black environment. Steve had this unique ability to sit you down and tell you what you'd done wrong, but you still went away thinking, he believes in me. Not many people can do that. He is absolutely a special guy. And so there's the hard work component. So this fellow was the vice captain at the time. As he said, we worked hard on being able to speak, being able to present, being able to receive feedback, being able to give feedback. So this is the idea of we're embracing something outside of the skill of rugby. We're embracing this idea of conversation and feedback. And it goes further. They adopted it as a value. So of 6 or 7 values, feedback in the belly became one that they embraced. And so it becomes part of behavior, and so it becomes part of culture. Because otherwise it's sitting out on its own somewhere. It's a training course somewhere, or it's an idea. Some people are doing it while some people aren't. But these people made it endemic to the environment and culture. It became a value. It became a ritual. They have something from Maori culture called a ware session. And the ware session says that we give each other permission to give any feedback. And there's a famous story after McCall gets his 100th cap, which is a big deal in rugby. They've beaten Wales by a record score. They go back into the change room and they say, let's have a ware session. And instead of celebrating and bringing out the champagne, they say to each other, how do we keep our feet in the ground? How do we go from very good to best ever? How do we not get ahead of ourselves? How do we remain humble in the moment? Was that particular ware session. And so we roll forward because we do have defeats, notwithstanding there might be a great culture, great vision, great mission. We might have embraced this idea of courageous conversation. We roll forward to this particular team who had their biggest defeat ever in 2007 at a World Cup. And what would have happened before was the coaching and the leadership would have all been fired. And instead what happens is they receive the feedback, and you're going to see McCall now, who's a glider pilot, reflecting as he's flying his plane on the ownership that he's taking and admitting, if you like, to himself and his country. I lost that game because I made poor decisions in the last 20 minutes. So under pressure, I was not able to be optimal from a mindset and decision-making point of view. I'm going to receive that information courageously and I'm going to do something about it. So let's just hear how how he owns that and reflects on it.
We had a team that was good enough to win the tournament, but it didn't come down to what our talent was. It came down to when the heat came on, we weren't able to find a way to win. You know, so training harder or being fitter, I don't think that would have made any difference that day. I probably was naive in thinking, you know, I can play well whenever it counts, and perhaps over my first few years I've been able to do that to some degree. But as a captain, I sort of had to admit that I didn't have the tools in the box when it came to handling pressure. And you know, that's where it became a bit like, well, how am I going to get that? Or is it just the fact I haven't got it, and that's it?
Best player in the world is saying, I messed it up and I don't have the toolbox and I need to embrace it, and I'm taking on the challenge to improve. What happens, what plays out, is they bring in a psychologist. The psychologist introduces this idea of redhead and bluehead. Redhead is I go to fight, flight, freeze under pressure. I don't make optimal decisions. Blue is I stay in the moment and make good judgments and decisions. And of course it doesn't just happen, so they have to practice it. Time and time and time again. They practice being put under pressure and making judgments. It was interesting, I was preparing for this a couple of days ago, and as happened, someone would make a comment, and they were commenting about the All Blacks always tending to win rugby games in the last 20 minutes. And this person was saying, they found a drug that the rest of the world hasn't yet found, because they're raising themselves to a physical level. And of course that's not true. What they did was they did this for 5 years. They practiced what the rest of the world wasn't practicing, deliberately and systematically. And so courageous conversation even goes to new recruits. So you're a new recruit, and imagine winning the badge or the jersey or the blazer or joining your organization, and on your first day you receive this question or these two questions. What do you bring to the team, and what are you prepared to sacrifice? It's courageous. And what they don't mean, and we ask these questions now as well, what we don't mean is, oh, I'm prepared to work on weekends or sacrifice family. We're looking for something deeper than that. There was a new employee in Mauritius, Irv, and she said, you know, I've thought about that question. I knew you were going to ask me that question. I'm prepared to sacrifice my comfort zone. I've been working at this big bank for 15 years, and I'm keen and prepared to sacrifice a comfort zone as an answer. And so it plays out. They win the next World Cup, and they win the second World Cup. 2 World Cups in a row. They take success from 70% to 93%, and actually 97% if McCaw and Carter are playing. 97%. I mean, no side has ever got anywhere close to that in any form of the sport, and they've done it over 15 years. And the idea is they've done something special, and it's our view that it related to feedback, conversation, courageous conversation through this whole process of leadership owning it, culture, process, deliberate practice. Okay, we're going to have opportunity for questions. So I want to press on to my second case study, which is this one. It's a company called Bridgewater. It was founded by a fellow called Ray Dalio. So his claim to fame is he built Bridgewater from typically his lounge in the States to the biggest hedge fund that there's ever been, the most successful hedge fund. He's made more money for his clients than any other hedge fund has ever done. There are 2,500 people today, and he did it on the back of courageous conversations. And so let's just meet Ray Dalio.
Whether you like it or not, radical transparency and algorithmic decision making is coming at you fast, and it's going to change your life. That's because it's now easy to take algorithms and embed them into computers and gather all that data that you're leaving on yourself all over the place, and know what you're like, and then direct the computers to interact with you in ways that are better than most people can. Well, that might sound scary. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have found it to be wonderful. My objective has been to have meaningful work and meaningful relationships with the people I work with. And I've learned that I couldn't have that unless I had that radical transparency and that algorithmic decision making. I want to show you why that is. I want to show you how it works. And I warn you that some of the things that I'm going to show you probably are a little bit shocking.
So yes, indeed, it is out there. It's probably the benchmark extreme example of courageous conversations. We're not standing here saying, well, this is the way we all need to go. But I think he's got some really good ideas. And I think showing you and sharing with you a benchmark example, hopefully there are one or two little things that spark an interest from you. So it started with this idea of I want to be a better human being, myself, Ray. I want to make better judgments. And in order to do that, I need to see truth. And the business I'm in was where he started. So I'm competing against other people who are looking at companies and looking at the economic environment of the world. And I want to see that more clearly than my competitors. How do I do that? Well, I embrace this idea of radical truth and radical transparency. How do I do that? Well, he's going to tell us now. I shift my mindset from thinking I'm right to asking, how do I know I'm right? And I saw clearly. Here was his insight. I saw clearly that the best way to answer that question is to find other independent thinkers on the same mission as me, who see things differently from me, and engage them in thoughtful disagreement. In other words, courageous conversation. To be successful, everyone has to think differently. And so they go radical. They systemize the whole culture. And would you believe, they tape every single conversation, everything. Every meeting, there's no, if you're getting fired, the conversation's getting taped. If you're getting hired, the conversation's getting taped. If you're in a confidential exco meeting, your conversation's getting taped because they want it to be truthful. And they want to remove the possibility of politics and forgetfulness and hiding behind something that's not courageous and true. You have to have the courage to do what's necessary, he says. And he says, once you understand how to do this, you will see that there's virtually nothing you can't accomplish. You just have to learn how to face your realities, including your biases and prejudices. And those biggest barriers are your ego and your blind spots. He's challenging us. Our biggest barriers are our ego and our blind spots, and we need people, by definition, blind spots, we don't see them. We need others to point those out to us, and we need to create a culture, and we need to embrace that opportunity for people to give us that feedback. If we do so, we will have a better opportunity of seeing truth. If we do so, we'll make better judgments. If we do so, the performance of our organization will improve. And so we land back again at this model of it's not a training course, it's not a coach. If you're going to be serious about a courageous conversation, it's I think imperative to at least appreciate that it's going to be a lot of work, but with massive reward. It goes to leadership, it goes to culture, it goes to skill and the practicing of that deliberate skill, environment and process. And so I do want to also leave you with one little takeaway, if you like. So if you said to me, what can I now take away from this thing? It's quite complicated, a lot to do. We're not going to go and start taping conversations tomorrow. It's this. This is a share from one of our exec directors who's been with our organization for the last couple of years, someone called Nazipa Mbanjwa. I think she's perhaps the best moderator in the world. And she's busy quietly coaching all of us. And she said to us, here's my little cheat sheet, Ricky, and executive. And here's what she's saying. She's saying, how do I reduce the institutional attitudinal distance that undermines emotional proximity between my team and I? How do I create an opportunity for dialogue instead of monologue? So I'm hearing myself too much. How do I build the muscle? How can I share ownership of the substance of the conversation? And how do we close, this is an important one, how do we close off conversations meaningfully so that the end becomes the source of new action. And so before I hand over to Joyce, because I want to play back to you this idea of courageous conversation, how you can take yourself to All Black or Bridgewater performance, and to say to you, if you go back to your CEO tomorrow and say, saw this presentation, do you, Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. CEO, wish to become as good as the All Blacks or as good as Bridgewater? And they say, yeah. And you say, well, we're going to start taping conversations. It starts with you, so you're going to have to embrace this journey of change and being open to feedback and looking at your blind spots and your ego. And by the way, I'm going to start coaching you on the Nazipo cheat sheet. I don't think that's going to be a good sell job. It ain't going to work. And what I'd like to spend some of the rest of the time doing is just reflecting on some of the struggles. So to share with you, Joyce is going to share with you how we're trying to embrace some of this stuff, some of the struggles in particular. So we're not successful at it. The last thing we want to do is stand here and say, this is how you do it, and we've done it. We haven't. But share with you some of the challenges and struggles that we've had in trying to embrace this idea of courageous conversations, because we absolutely understand that I can become a better person if I do, and Joyce and the LOMG team, some of whom are here, can become better people, better performers for ourselves, our teams, our company, and actually our country. So Joyce, would you share some struggles?
Will do. So I'm going to move over here so I don't fall over. So Ricky's given you lots of great ingredients, and I think what I wanted to share with you is kind of practically what you can do with them. So I'm actually not driving. If you can get me to. Thank you. Okay, so perfect. So just to share some context around our own journey, the first being, not actually working. Can you just drive for me? Perfect. The first being, what we started. So we started with a CEO leadership that was really clear and distinct on what we wanted in the organization. It started with a very clear mandate from Ricky and from the leadership team about Black women empowerment in our business. And so, the courageous conversation began with Ricky actually being vulnerable and saying, looking at historic information and looking at our leadership team, we have some work to do here. And so what he did was he started inviting groups of people from our business, across the business and at various levels, 5 people to 5 specific invitations for the conversation. And the feedback that came out of that was actually has been and continues to be quite revealing for us, that we are tackling issues, everything from female empowerment to patriarchy to customary beliefs and practices. And so the notion that the conversation should be broad, should be inclusive, and should be diverse is something that I think we embraced and continue to embrace. So the invitation to you would be, as Ricky said, to go back to your CEO or to your leadership, and for whatever imperative that you have strategically, how courageous are you willing to be, and how broad are you willing to be in terms of engagement? Next one would be cascading a culture of radical truthfulness. So after the Dahlia work and our introduction to that as a case study and a way of work, we started something around a short exercise every day to provide feedback. And that feedback needed to be authentic and real and true. And what Ricky was then able to do is to create a bit of a network, and we call it triangulating that feedback. So you can imagine if my response to Ricky is authentic about something that's happened to me during the day and something that I'm struggling with, which is quite a big term in our business, as you'll see, his ability to triangulate and begin conversations that are much broader started the journey, and we're on our way to a culture of radical truthfulness, meaning we have to be prepared to say what we really mean. And if we go back to the thinking in the video, and Dahlia's is very clear that the best answer is what we seek in the organization, and it may not be yours. And so if you're open to that process and you understand that through engagement, often robust, that the real and the best answer will be found. So that's kind of where we are on that journey, and it's been quite illuminating. I think the people in the room that are participating and would say it adds tremendous value, because to the blind spots conversation, you can't see what you can't see. And so to be able to do that and get a culture of that in our business is something that we continue to try to do. The next piece would be developing game-specific skills. And so this is really something we talk a lot about in our business, is what does it take? And as we look at skills development for the future, we know there's some specific skills that are being cultivated and some that are being diminished as we look at Industry 4.0, but also 5.0 that's coming our way. And we know that there's some specific skills that will be really important as data continues to lead the way that we work. And here are a few that we focus on in our organization. Mindful listening, vulnerability. I mean, to be radically truthful and transparent means you have to be vulnerable. So imagine I say something, as I said, that I think is particularly important for me and my lens, and it now gets triangulated throughout the organization. That represents some vulnerability. We then look at things like radical transparency, as I mentioned. And then I think the big one that I want to land on is feedback. Really developing a culture of not only being comfortable receiving, but actively asking for it. So one practice that I'd like to share with you that we do in many of our management meetings is we will ask for real-time feedback from our CFO and from our CEO. You know, what do you think about that? I want to hear about it now. Versus in the past, we would present, we would come back. We might get feedback later, but in the flow, we're getting real-time feedback. And for many of you who have to present results at times like this, that can be incredibly vulnerable as well. So, but again, we're on a journey, and it's providing meaningful information for us about decisions to make. The next one would be ensuring deliberate practice. So Ricky alluded to it. We have a particular 20-minute-a-day model that we advocate in our organization, which really contains many of these steps. So practicing, making sure we have coaches that can help us in areas of weakness and development, feedback loops, which I've mentioned somewhat in terms of how we triangulate information and how we ask for feedback, and then the concept of struggle. We talk a lot about the obstacle is the way, and that, in fact, through struggle, we're able to find more innovative and more befitting solutions, but we have to be comfortable with cognitive dissonance. We have to be comfortable being uncomfortable to allow that process to play out. And so we're actively building a culture, which is quite a shift. If you can think about organizational performance, it's not often that you're encouraged to be in a place where you actually don't know the answer. Leadership has taught us historically that decisiveness is a key characteristic. We need to make a decision. And so we are actually building a culture of what the struggle is. First of all, to identify what it is, to acknowledge that you're in a position of struggle, and to let it play its course. Because without that, you often make hasty decisions that are not rooted in good judgment and ultimately cost you performance in the end. So something I want to leave with you. Think about how readily you personally or your organizations are willing to struggle, because it's been a big part of our journey. The next one is creating a conducive environment. So we talk about ignition and motivation. So for us, it was the declaration of what we intended that was very deliberate, if we go back to our first point. And we wanted to make sure that, again, the performance of our people were enabled by an environment where they could actually thrive, not just survive. And we, again, come back to this context that failure is not fatal. So again, to really continually embed that failing or getting it wrong is how we actually get it right. If we think about all the books that are written by leaders today, and they talk about how many failed business entities they've had or how many experiences, we know that the journey to success is often and is usually a journey of great failure after failure after failure. So for us, failure is not fatal, and it's actually the way that we know that performance is improved. And so that's what we're trying to embed in our culture. And then the last one is something we talk a lot about at LRMG, which is a process for implementing a process. And that usually gets all the people a little concerned when we say, wow, how do you wire a process? It's already a process. But we know that in order to do that, we have to make sure that benchmark processes are implemented, number one. We want to make sure that the design we've thought through, we've engaged sufficiently, and this would be one of those. So what was our intent? Going back to the beginning, what was the process? How would we make sure that everyone was engaged broadly, and what would we do with that feedback? And then we went on to, can you sell the process? So we actually had a very authentic conversation in our leadership teams about the intent, what is behind it, and how will you position it with your people. And we do something in our business called SimSups, which stands for Simulated Supervision, which comes from the NASA environment in the United States. And it's actually practicing a process with people that can give you real-time feedback about your performance and what you're actually landing. So you can imagine as executives and leaders that we are actually practicing what we're going to say to our people and how we're going to engage, which added tremendous value and helped us be better at selling the process. We then moved on to clear lines of accountability. So who's responsible for what? And I think that's often where processes fall over. Who's doing what and when, and making sure that we're measuring the process for compliance frequently. So if we're having these breakfasts, if we're consolidating feedback, if we're reporting back to the business, in what frequency will we be doing that, and who will be responsible for it? So I think ours is a journey, it continues, but these would be the 6 kind of recipe elements. So it could be a recipe or it could be a menu for your organization. But today, these are the things that are working particularly well in our environment and have really got us off to what I think is a great start around how we will develop a culture that provides for courageous conversations. So that would be me, and I think Ricky wants to take a few questions.
We've got 5 or 10 minutes if you do want to engage us with some questions or give us feedback in the belly.
Yeah,
We'd be
we'd
open
appreciate
to
it.
that. We got a roving mic somewhere, have we?
Use this one.
Oh, is that the roving mic?
Do we have a hand?
Do we have a hand up? As people think of what they want to say, what occurs to me, Ricky, I was going through some research recently, and it said that 3 things that leaders are going to have to deal with in the emerging world, as we understand it. One is employee activism. So moving from the idea of employee experience to employee activism. And it's interesting because in the work that Martin shared with us at the breakfast and earlier, it was this idea that going forward, people want to co-create. And that's what employee activism is about. And it occurred, the other 2 are dealing with more complex workplace and workspaces. So yes, we know they're complex, but the space, how work is formed and where work is formed will be different. And the third was dealing with external stakeholders as part of their internal accountability groups. So up till now, we've been able to leave externals outside, but now they're integrated in. It occurred to me as I listened to both Ricky and Joyce that this idea of courageous conversations, how are we preparing ourselves as leaders to moderate these conversations? How are we building the muscle around courage, the muscle around vulnerability? Because employee activism is exactly that, activism. Now we're still talking about experience, which is something we're giving. And the way that work is going, people are want to co-create this. So what's happening in your organizations? How far are you away from that? Or how close? Maybe already there's some examples of how this is happening.
Thanks to both of you. It's a great learning experience. My question is, you're building a culture, and a personal reflection is that often our courageous ability to share has a pushback in that we are worried about the reaction from the other individual or from the group. And how do you deal with that growth of that skill to be able to accept that and the conflict that could arise as you start this journey? Because it's our own fear of the reaction, having got past our fear of giving the feedback.
Mike, if I could, thank you for that question. Can you hear me? So it goes to this idea of blind spot, and it goes to the humility to ask that question of, this is not just going to be about saying, well, let's start having courageous conversations. And it goes to the preparedness of first of all, me as a leader. So am I prepared to be the change that I want, as Dahlia was, and as McCall and the coaches were? And that's an understanding that's not going to be easy, because we all come with our stories and our stuff. And just like with the head coach of the All Blacks, what I represented as a leader 10 years ago is not going to work today in that kind of environment. So it starts with me. Then what muscle am I making available to the individuals? What muscle am I making available to the teams and to the whole organization? Because if it's just a pocket, it's not going to work. And so having done that or having recognized that, what culture am I enabling? So how am I reinforcing it through values and behaviors? How am I reinforcing it through rituals? How am I reinforcing it through stories and the original story and referencing this idea that is important that we've got to live into? And so it becomes a whole way of thinking and way of work, Mike. Otherwise, the suggestion is you'll go into limbic brain, and as you are correctly suggesting, it will not end well.
And I just wanted to add, I think the vulnerability and the courage piece that Bebe spoke about at the beginning, if you start that conversation as we did, saying we don't have all the answers, we have an objective, we have some ideas about how we will journey, and we want to partner with you and everyone in the organization. So I think by having that courage and that vulnerability, it empowers others to have the same. So that response becomes somewhat diminished, it's not defensive, and it's genuinely rooted in, imagine 5 people having breakfast with the CEO, talking about these things candidly, authentically, and feeling safe to do so. So I just think that's an important part of the start of the journey.
One departure point, Mike, and all of you. If you say you're going to do it and you don't live into it, you're dead in the water. So if you go back to your organization and say, we're going to be a courageous conversation organization, we want to be like the All Blacks, we want to be like Bridgewater, and you can't follow through, you raise the expectation, you can't follow through, in particular yourself, not through what you say, but what you do, you're dead in the water. Rather don't do it. There's a question, it's going to be our last question, so thank you. Do we got a microphone?
It's coming. Thanks, Owen.
Hi, I'm Melanie from Scalability.
Melanie?
A little bit specific, but this question of inclusivity. I'm struggling with a leadership issue where I have a leader who is incredibly shy. So perfectly courageous, willing to speak up, but it's so difficult to get the message out there because her shyness makes everything come out kind of wrong. So how can one be inclusive of people, because there are different personality types? You guys are both very comfortable standing up, talking in front of other people, and I think a lot of other people, there are people who are incredibly shy. How do you get it inclusive for those kind of people?
So Melanie, that's a great question. My first answer would be the assumption that shyness equals I can't create a culture of courageous conversation. I'm trying to think of the author. There's a great book that I'm gonna take your name, Melanie, and written by a woman in the United States, talking about this idea of introvert. This introvert is somewhere in the title, and she's talking about it's the day of the introvert, basically. So that would be my one question back to you. The other would be, it's all about, first of all, the vulnerability and the self-awareness, and then what we've learned. Here's something that we've learned in the last couple of years that we absolutely didn't know. I wish I'd known this 22 years ago. You can become good at anything, and that idea of 10,000 hours, it doesn't apply. It certainly does. It applies for Roger Federer. It doesn't apply in work. We can become absolutely excellent at something in 20 minutes a day with a practice that we call deliberate practice. So this idea of, can I chunk and identify the things I need to be good at? So if I'm shy or my speaking, just like the assistant coach Steve Hansen did. Remember, he was a constable. He couldn't talk, he couldn't listen, he couldn't ask questions. 10 years later, Richie McCaw says, you're the best giver of feedback I've ever met. Can be done.
And I just wanted to add quickly, this standard of kind of Western leadership for women is often something we talk about, that if you're incredibly comfortable in front of groups of people, so Ricky's point is really important, that it's a skill to drive certain conversations, but there's a variety of channels that voice finding can take. So for those who are, again, small gatherings for that leader potentially versus auditorium style, rotational, so that, the comfort level and the real authentic conversation can take place. I think it's something that we continue to work on because there isn't one rubber stamp of what a leader looks like and how one behaves, and particularly in our culture and the cultural context for that. You may be very soft-spoken and brilliant. So I think we really encourage a variety of media and the practice of skill associated with specific interventions.
So I want to thank you all. Thanks for the nodding heads and the energy you were giving us during that conversation with you. I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, LRMG. Thank you, Ricky. And thank you, Joyce.